Hello and welcome to the Voice of Liberty podcast. My name is Henry Conley. As you see, there's no video intro today. And the reason there's no video intro is because today's topic's one that I take very close to me and I stand massively against. Today we're going to talk about capital punishment and we're going to talk about justice. And the reason we're going to talk about those two things is because for the first time in 17 years, this morning, the United States federal government put to death someone who should have spent the rest of their life in jail. Now, when we talk about capital punishment, it is a massively divided subject. When we talk about capital punishment, it is a subject that is typically divided amongst political lines, amongst ideologies, amongst backgrounds, and how you were raised. But when I approach this topic of capital punishment, I want to approach it from this end. Typically, capital punishment is supported by Republicans and not necessarily supported by Democrats. Typically, if you're more conservative, you believe in hanging someone or putting someone to death, electrocuting them, lethal injection, whatever it may be. If you're more conservative, you typically listen to music that glorifies these things. A couple things, just a quick reference to back that up. Toby Keith has a song which mentions hanging them high in an old oak tree. But when we talk about this, and we talk about this looking at a conservative viewpoint on executions, a conservative viewpoint on capital punishment, I should mention that in 2018, the United States was ranked number 7 in the world for executions carried out. We were ranked number 7, only below China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Vietnam, Iraq, and Egypt. Countries typically not found to be fond of within conservative culture. Below us, you had Japan, Pakistan, Singapore, Somalia, South Sudan, Belarus, Yemen, Afghanistan, Botswana, Sudan, Thailand, Taiwan, and North Korea. Of course, North Korea, it's unknown how many they killed. But what are the numbers? In the United States in 2018, 25 people were put to death. This falls below the 43 plus in Egypt, 52 plus in Iran, 85 plus in Vietnam, 149 in Saudi Arabia, 253 plus in Iran, and 1,000 plus in China. So while our numbers pale in comparison, there's still something to be talked about. The United States is one of the few first world nations which still carries out executions. The United States is one of the few developed nations in the world that still carries out executions. The United States is one of the few first world nations that still believes that capital punishment is a deterrent, that it will deter crimes, even though there are studies that will actually prove that it doesn't, and that abolishing capital punishment has a better effect on murder rates than the actual existence of capital punishment. I'll reference that study in a minute here. But something I wanted to talk about quick here, and the reason that there was an injunction on lethal injection in being that is the federal protocol for capital punishment, the reason there was an injunction on it, which was filed in 2005, was because there were lawsuits filed in the federal courts challenging the protocol on the grounds that it violated the United States Constitution's 8th Amendment ban on cruel and unusual punishment by carrying a risk of severe pain. The reason these lawsuits were filed and this injunction existed was because the Justice Department had abandoned its previous 3-drug protocol because of a shortage of an anesthetic called sodium thiopental, moving to a 1-drug protocol using pentobarbital. Now, pentobarbital is very much controversial. As far as a lethal injection method, it is extremely controversial because even the manufacturer of pentobarbital does not guarantee that the subject is asleep or passed out or thereby unconscious at the time that it stops their heart. They don't guarantee that the subject is not feeling symptoms of drowning or suffocation at the time that their heart is stopped. The single drug cocktail negates the anesthetic aspect of what was the 3-drug cocktail. So there was a federal lawsuit and an injunction put on this. Now, this whole push for lethal injection to suddenly come back around really started in December of 2019 when AG Barr, acting on behalf of the Trump administration, pushed the Supreme Court to overturn its injunction, which it did, and they were able to schedule the lethal injection of 4 people this year. 4 people sitting on a federal death row system. Now, those who don't know about federal death row is in Terre Haute in Indiana. That is the capital punishment center for the United States Federal Prison Bureau. Now, I just want to go through some things. One, the nation should never have the power to take the life of a free individual. Whether they are locked in prison or not, they are still free individuals. They theoretically should still be protected by the Constitution of the United States of America. Whether they are on death row for capital murder or whatever, they still have rights. They have rights under the United States Constitution, and as the Constitution states, they have rights given to them by a higher power. Now, moving from that aspect of things, it goes beyond that. It's been proven in a research or in a study done by the Abdurrahman Bormand Center, a Washington, D.C. based organization that promotes human rights and democracy in Iran, that nations who abolish the death penalty tend to see their murder rates decline. This is a 2018 study. Nations that have abandoned the death penalty have lower murder rates. And it's been also proven in other studies that in the United States of America, the death penalty is not a deterrent to murder. It doesn't cause people to not want to murder people. It doesn't cause people to not go out and commit the crimes that land them on death row. It's been even more proven in the United States, this is now, mind you, more in history, but that crimes against white victims tend to end up in a capital punishment charge more often than crimes against minorities. It's even crazier because crimes in general committed by minorities despairingly end up as capital punishment charges and not life in prison like the white person who faces the same charge. Now, going beyond that, capital punishment is more expensive than housing an inmate for life currently. And the reason for these, I take directly from deathpenaltyinformation.com. You can go on their website and you can see the information that I'm about to list. Capital punishment is more expensive due to the rights afforded to prisoners. And I'm not arguing against those rights because those rights should exist. And I'm going to explain them even more why they should exist in just a minute. But capital punishment in general costs more than imprisoning a prisoner for life. And the reason is legal costs. Almost all the people who face death penalty cannot afford their own attorney. The state must assign public defenders or court-appointed lawyers to represent them. The accepted practice is to assign 2 lawyers and pay the costs of the prosecution as well. Pretrial costs. Capital cases are far more complicated than non-capital cases and take longer to go to trial. Experts will probably be needed on forensic evidence, mental health, and the background and life history of the defendant. County taxpayers pick up the costs of added security and longer pretrial detention. Jury selection. Because of the need to question jurors thoroughly on their views about the death penalty, jury selection in a capital case is much more time-consuming and expensive. Trial. Death penalty trials can last more than 4 times longer than non-capital trials. requiring jury and attorney compensation in addition to court personnel and other related costs. Incarceration. Most death penalties or death rows involve solitary confinement in a separate facility. These require more security and other accommodations as the prisoners are kept for 23 hours a day in cells. And appeals. To minimize mistakes, every prisoner is entitled to a series of appeals. These costs are borne at the taxpayer's expense. These appeals are essential because some inmates have come within hours of execution before evidence was uncovered proving they're innocent. Now, let's talk about people who were executed in the United States whom possibly were innocent. Now, of the thousands of people executed within the United States, the number is sitting somewhere around 4% that were theorized to be innocent and then executed. Now, 4%, that's not a huge number. It's not a massive number when 96% of them theoretically were actually guilty of the crime that they were charged with and executed for. But still, 4%. In the United States of America, in the nation of freedom, in the land of liberty, is a number that should never exist. I'd be upset about this if it was 0.00001%. Because in the nation of liberty, in the nation of freedom, in the nation that has a constitution that recognizes the rights endowed on a free individual by their creator, that number should never be more than 0. This goes beyond me standing against the death penalty. This goes beyond me standing against capital punishment. Because honestly, in a nation which has a constitution which recognizes the rights endowed to a free individual by their creator, there should be no chance for the state to take the lives of someone. But with keeping in mind that the death penalty does exist, that number should never, ever be more than 0% that were theorized to be innocent after they were executed. Since 1989, the United States has potentially executed 18 people who were innocent, the most recent in 2019. Most of these people, you guessed it, were minorities. Most of these people did not have a dime to appeal the way they needed to. The state spent thousands upon thousands of dollars on these people's appeals and generally ignored them. I've read over the cases of all 18 people. The evidence was clear. The evidence proved their innocence, but they were still executed by the state. 4% and 18 people since 1989 is more than enough reason for the death penalty to not exist. Again, I am going to stress this piece again because this piece really is what I care about the most. In the nation that has a constitution and a Bill of Rights which recognizes the rights of all men and women created equal under their creator, the death penalty shouldn't exist. Add on top of it that 18 innocent people have died by the hands of the state since 1989. Add on top of that 4% of the people have been murdered by the state were innocent. This is a barbaric practice that should not exist. You look at other first world nations like us that afford rights to their citizens that are recognized by a form of a Bill of Rights or a constitution. They don't have the death penalty. Why? Because they recognize that it's barbaric, that it's ancient in practice. Science and basic statistics backs up the fact that the death penalty does not deter crime. But what does deter crime is the prospect of living the rest of your life behind bars. That's what comes out of all the different research studies and surveys done to verify the effectiveness as a deterrent of capital punishment. This video is going to go a little bit over 15 minutes, but I have to stress this. It goes beyond any of what I just said. I'm a libertarian. I'm naturally skeptical of the federal government. I'm naturally skeptical of the government as a whole. Beyond that, I'm an anarchist. I don't believe in the government. And one thing I definitely don't believe in is giving the government the power to take someone's life, a free person's life, based upon charges that they put on them. Beyond that, if evidence was ignored that proved 4% of people executed to be innocent, then how easy would it be for the state to press fictitious charges on you and execute you? That's what we should be thinking about, because that's what the main concern is. The United States has the power to take the life of an innocent person. The United States has the power to charge an innocent person with crimes that are executable. They could fake the evidence. They could potentially ignore evidence. And then you could be the next one dying from lethal injection. You could be the next one laying on a gurney, proclaiming your innocence as you slowly slip away and suffocate or drown. Now, I'm not claiming that the man that was executed today, the next two that will be executed this week, or the one that will be executed in August were innocent. I'm not claiming that. I haven't looked into their cases. But I will say this: they should have spent the rest of their lives in jail. If there's something that a voice of liberty can change, is something as barbaric as the death penalty. So be a voice of liberty. Awaken the voice of liberty.